Good afternoon, everybody. It's Malina Monaco and Vince O'Neill from CAEP, and we come to you from the webinar room in DC, where it's very cold. I appreciate all of you taking some time to go through our interim advanced webinar, and I have just a couple of things that we'll go through that's kind of housekeeping. So if you have questions, you can use the question box in the webinar. And as long as you're logged in so we can see your name, we can respond back. So if during the course of the webinar you have questions and they post up, Vince is going to try and answer them in real time. Or I'll talk about them if I can fit them in to the webinar as we're going along. I might actually answer some of the questions or might get to it, as we're going through. I will do that. Any questions that we don't get to or are specific to your EPP, for example, I'll be answering after the webinar. So when you log in, as long as your name or some way, email or something is posted that I can respond to, that's great. So if you're logged in anonymously, then I won't be able to respond back because I won't know who it's from. So if you are anonymous and you want me to respond back to a question, then just make sure that your name or your email or something shows up so that I can get the answer to the right person. And if you're calling in and it's just your phone number showing up on the list, then also let me know a name or email so that I can respond back, since I don't know everybody's phone number for the 84 people that are on the webinar right now. So that's how we'll handle questions. And then again, I will answer any questions we don't get to or that are specific to your EPP after the presentation. So we're also recording this. So if you have folks at your EPP that weren't able to attend the live version, this will be posted at the end of the day or tomorrow on the YouTube channel, so you'll be able to send the link to anybody that needs to see it from your EPP if they are not here. Okay, so I know that this is a new process for folks, and they're stressed out, and so I know this is where everybody is. What's the process? What do I follow to find the process I need? So I hope today's webinar gives you some details and some answers to your questions, and then I'm sure that it will raise more questions. And maybe as you go through this process, you'll need to reach out again. So feel free to reach out to me at any point. I'm the case manager for all of the interim advanced reviews. So any kind of questions that you have as you go along your path, please don't hesitate to reach out. No questions too small, and reach out to me. So Vince is going to talk a little bit about the timelines that originally went out in the letters from the Accreditation Council.
So you may, internally, we've defined each of these as tiers. There's a single tier for A and B, and these were the site visits that are prior to fall 18. So you all have different timelines. They're off by 6 months in each, but the timelines are, what happens during the timeline is the same. So when we go through the details, if you're in tier C or tier D, you will just be off by, your time will be the same in terms of that. So the self-study for your tier A and tier B, which is our biggest group, will be next January, January 2nd. And then our virtual visits, we're gonna get done between March and August. So all of this work will be done in that one calendar year with the decisions made at the council in that following October. So January 2, you'll turn in your visit. By October, the decisions will be made. Tier C, that pushed back. So your visit was in fall 18 and your self-study is due in September of the same year, 2021. We're gonna do all those visits. There aren't too many of those from October to December. And then that will be decided at the spring council in 22. And then the tier D, which is the last group who just had decisions in this past AC, your self-study is due January of 22, January 3rd. We'll do these visits. There's only a few less of this group between March and June. And then this group will also go back to the Accreditation Council that in October of 22 for their final decision. So the process is the same. you know what group you're in based on when your self-study is due. So you should have a waiver that has the dates of what you waived in the waiver that you signed was the timelines that are associated in the policy manual with all of the reports and things like that. So basically what we did with that waiver was say, here are the timelines that we're going to do. Here's all the parts of the policy that we're waiving to do this if you want to participate. So I will, and if you're unsure, you can definitely get in touch with us if you don't know what group you're in or don't know when things are due. I can send you a copy of your waiver so you'll know that, or we can get that information to you. So you can reach out to Malina or myself and get that information. I'm sort of answering some chat while I'm talking about the timelines. Okay, so that's pretty much the timeline. So again, the rest of this, I don't think we have dates specifically in there because it's just the process. Your date will depend on what tier that you're in.
So one of the questions about, so when you look at tier A and B, that the site visits, the virtual visits can occur all the way into the summer, right? They can occur into August. And that option is available. I know that, one of the questions is, well, faculty are off contract, or, folks work 9 months or 10 months, but they're not here in the summer. So that is an option, and it doesn't mean that you have to do that. It means that it's an option. So for some EPPs, where they have a core group of folks that are doing their CAEP reporting and their data, and they are the same folks that would be part of the virtual visit, they would prefer it to be, in the summer when it's less busy. And so that's an option, and that's fine, and that's in there. If your faculty and folks in your EPP don't want that, or you're not on contract in the summer to do that, then we'll, make your visit earlier. You're deciding on your site visit date yourself, along with CAEP and the state, if you're a joint state. So that decision is up to you. So you could move yours into the semester if that's not going to work. But the option is there if you choose to do that in the summer. Just because we have so many of these visits for tier A and B, I think there's 60 of the interim advance that semester. We extended the timeline a little bit to include and to be a little more flexible with when that happens. So, so that's why that looks the way it looks. The other thing about interim advanced, which is different than a sort of standard review, is that the self-studies are all due the same day. So all 60 of those self-studies are coming to CAEP the same day, January 2nd, right? They're all due the same day. So in the process of figuring out the best way to be expedient with the reviews, we're going to have teams ready this previous semester. So teams will be ready, and then on January 2nd, they can start to work. And the virtual visit timeline, March to August, allows for the team to meet, to review the self-study, and to provide the formative feedback for you to have your addendum created and then to schedule the virtual visit. So that's why there's a lag between January and March. So, if you set yours to March 1st, that would mean that you would, your self-study would be on the 2nd, your team would be right to work, and then you would have the opportunity to do your addendum and all of that prior to your site visit. So, so that's why there's that lag. You can't have a site visit on January the 3rd because your team wouldn't have their work done and you wouldn't have your time for your addendum. So that's why the lag is there. But again, if you know that January 2nd, you're not even back on campus, or you're not under contract until, say, January 15th, then your shell is open, and so you're able to submit your report earlier. So if you wanted to do that in December before the break, you're more than welcome to do that, and we will, have a team assigned, and if they wanted to start working, they could over the break. So there is some flexibility, and I know that happens to fall at a not a great time for academics, because it's usually during break, that January 2nd date. So if you need to have that earlier, we have a year now to sort of think ahead and figure out what looks best for you and your EPP. Okay, so a couple of logistical items that we wanted to kind of talk about. One, to reiterate that there's not a fee for the interim advanced review, so you're not going to get a bill or anything for an advanced review for these. They are virtual visits, so that means that there's nobody coming to your campus, that those are done through Zoom or GoToMeetings or some other online avenue. So they are virtual. And your site team is going to have 2 people, a lead and one site visitor. And then the opportunity for another site visitor, if it's a joint state and the state wants to appoint somebody to be part of the writing team, that's fine as well, but there'll be no more than 3 people on any of the interim advanced reviews. And for anybody that's not in a joint state, there'll be 2. Vince talked a little bit about your letters of agreement that you agreed to that we have signed letters from everybody that's going through this process. So we do have that. And then I just wanted to also make clear that this does not modify or change your accreditation status for your next synced visit. So whenever that is, right, 5 years out or 4 years out, whenever your next scheduled traditional site visit is, that will include both initial and advanced, that does not change. Okay, so the interim advance is getting you through. It's an interim step to get you to that next synced visit so that your advanced programs stay accredited. So I just wanted to make sure that folks understood that, because we've had some questions about, well, if I do this interim advance, that means I don't have to put my advanced programs up in my next review. No, you do. They need to be part of the next synced review in your schedule from your original accreditation letter. So I just wanted to mention those logistical items before we get into some of the details about what we're doing moving forward. So I wanted to include this graphic. So I presented this at CAEPCON in a few ways, and people have asked for it. So if you're wondering which of your advanced programs you're including and what you may or may not include, I think this helps a little bit. So when you start at the beginning, or to start here, and it says, does the program lead to advanced license and credential? And so answering that question, yes or no. So if the answer is no, if you have programs, advanced programs that do not lead to an advanced license or credential, then they're not included in this review. So you might have some programs that you think are advanced, but they lead to maybe an initial license and they should have been an initial side. You have some that don't lead to a license or credential at all, and they might not be included. And then sort of the next question is this program accredited through another CHIA approved accreditor? So these are not SPAs, these are other accreditors. So the most common example is CAECREP for counselor ed. And so if that program is accredited through CAECREP, your counselor ed programs, then you don't necessarily put that up through CAEP, right? So that's a no. But there's also a line that goes to the yellow box that says your state requires all programs to go through CAEP review. So we do have a few states that require all programs to go through CAEP review regardless of their accreditation status with other accreditors. And so that's a state decision. So again, in the world, when you're out there and you hear some people say, well, we included our CAECREP accredited program in our review, and you are in a state that said that it was okay to have a CHIA approved accreditor, and you're not including it, don't feel like you have to include it because your neighbor in another state is including it. Each state has their own policy about that. So if your state is one of those states that has a policy specifically about CHIA approved accreditors, or that all programs go through, then you would have to include them. But for most states, they're saying that that's okay, and a letter from the accreditor, basically the accreditation action for that, suffices, and you don't have to include any of those programs that are CHIA approved accredited. So so just to clarify that, I know there's everybody talks amongst each other, and then they are confused if some states have it and include it and others don't. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And then the next question is, does the program have a university supervised internship or clinical experience? And this is really, so once you've decided your programs are included, kind of which bucket you're going to put them in. And I color code things, so I color coded this. So if the program has a university supervised internship or clinical experience, I'm calling that a green program. That means that you're going to address all the advanced components for each standard, right? So everything's going to be addressed for a green program. And so the simplest example for a green program would be like a principalship program. They have an supervised internship, and then that program would address all the components for each of the standards. And then if the program does not have a university supervised internship or clinical experience, I'm calling those purple programs. So an example of a purple program may be that you have a math education program and it does not have a university supervised clinical experience. It may have an internship hours, but it's not supervised. So there's not truly a clinical experience connected to them. Those are purple programs. So I call those like partial or purple. So you're going to address, you know, the components for each of the standards, but there are some of those standards or components that may not be applicable to that program. So the example I just gave, that program does not have a clinical experience. So you're not going to have limited, you're going to have limited or no data for A 2.1 or A 2.2 because there's not a clinical experience associated with the program. And so that's okay, right, for those purple programs. And then you may have different or, you know, usually different data for 4.1, which is the employer satisfaction component. So you might have different types of data for that than you would for some of your other green programs. So I just put those in there as examples. So you still include them, but you don't worry about the components that don't apply to that program. Generally, it's going to be in standard 2 and then A 4.1. And then I put the list of the phase-in components as well and referring to them so that when you're thinking about your programs, I hope this table at least helps you think about what's in and what's included, and then the ones that are included, kind of how you're going to parse them out in terms of green and purple. So again, this might take some thinking about with your EPP and the folks in your EPP, and also your state. So there are a lot of states that already have a list. So for each EPP, they have a list of the licenses that they have the ability to recommend for, and they've already decided whether they're initial or advanced and kind of which bucket they fall in. So if you are an institution that has a connection to your state, or there's a joint process, then check with your state, because like I said, a lot of the states are creating lists of programs to include with advanced, and that will be very helpful so you're not reinventing the wheel. In addition, any program that is, you know, we use the term add-on, but I know in different states it's different, but those programs that are a compilation of courses, so a candidate can take courses at your institution or other institutions, and once they cobble together the set number of courses or the set components of the courses, they apply to the state for licensure. Those programs are also not included under CAEP's umbrella, so those kind of add-on or additional add-on programs, they have 3 or 4 courses, or they, you know, that you're not recommending them for license at the EPP level, they're being licensed at the state level. So you may offer coursework, or you may offer the entire program, but you're not recommending them for license. Those programs are not included here as well. Okay. So the process for the interim advanced, it looks exactly the same as it does for a regular site visit. So I know there was a lot of discussion previously about sort of what this process may look like, and that would be condensed in some way. And the process in AIMS and that you're going to go through looks exactly the same. So when you go into AIMS and you look at your shell, you'll notice that the shells look the same. They just have the initial, the advanced programs listed, but that the shell and the process for the review looks the same. So you have a self-study, you'll have a formative feedback report, there'll be an opportunity for an addendum, there'll be a virtual visit, and then you'll have an opportunity for a rejoinder, and then all that information goes to the Accreditation Council. So that's something that looks very similar, and the process should be very familiar to you all for having just gone through the initial, either this year or previous year. So that process looks the same. So just know that the timeline, the condensing of the timeline, is that it's occurring in one semester, and that all the reports are due at one time. It's not condensing the actual steps. Those steps are all there. It's just condensing the actual timeline in which those steps are happening. And do remember that cases go to the Accreditation Council for the following semester for the final decision. So again, teams are making recommendations and the Accreditation Council is making the final decision. And I did want to mention that in AIMS, the templates are open for tiers A, B, and C. So you can log into AIMS, and if you click on the semester that your advanced program review is supposed to occur, you can click on that at the top under semester and you'll be able to see your shell. And then you'll be able to use it right now. So if you want to start adding things into that shell, that's fine. But it's there for you to kind of look at and get a feel for. But it should look very, very familiar. So I did want to mention the legacy advanced AFIs as well. So at the end of every report, in your site visit report, there's a section for legacy AFIs. So for NCAEP legacy or TAC legacy areas for improvement. And because this is an interim advanced review, those advanced level legacy AFIs will be in that section and they will be addressed. And so this is how they're going to be addressed. So moving forward, we can't have legacy AFIs move forward. And so since the advanced programs are being reviewed at this time during your interim advanced, this is a good time to clear up all those legacy AFIs. So they will be included at the end, and basically they're going to be addressed in one of two ways. So, don't spend a lot of time writing narrative and adding evidence to that section of the template, because if the EPP is looking at that AFI and it is within the CAEP advanced standards, right? Because there were some things under TAC or under NCAEP that are no longer in CAEP advanced standards. So if you look at your AFI and it's not part of the current CAEP standards, then you can just say that. You can just say this legacy AFI is no longer part of CAEP standards. And that's all you have to say. And then if it does fall within CAEP standards at some point, all you have to do is say where you think it goes. You can say the EPP will address this legacy AFI in CAEP Advanced Standard 2 or CAEP Advanced Standard 5 or wherever you think it may fit. And then teams are trained to look at that, and then they're looking at evidence and narrative within the CAEP standards that you are addressing and providing for them. They're not looking for additional evidence for those legacy AFIs. So if they are included in CAEP standards, they're going to get reviewed in that appropriate standard, and those legacy AFIs are going to be removed one of these two ways. One is that they're addressed through CAEP, or one is that they're no longer part of CAEP and they're not going to be addressed, and they're going to be removed. So I know a lot of people spend some time on those sections and try and figure out what data to put there or what elements to put there in evidence, but if you just do that in your standards, then that's fine, right? The team's going to review all of those components for that standard anyway. So, so that they do need to be addressed, but in a very simple way moving forward. So you would not have addressed any of your legacy AFIs for advanced in any previous review, right? So if you went through a few years ago, you would have just done initial. And so your advanced programs would not have been reviewed, and those advanced AFIs would have moved forward to this report. So that's what's going to show up. So you're not addressing any of your initial AFIs from your previous CAEP visit. Those are going to skip over this advanced review since it's only advanced programs, and they're going to continue in your regular synced review, and you're going to be addressing those in your annual reports anyway. So, so it's just the advanced AFIs. Okay, so I wanted to talk just a little bit about the advanced standard assessments and just being aware that they are kind of different. So, when we think about common assessments, on the initial side of the house, there are lots of common assessments and lots of common kind of activities that are done. But in the advanced side of the house, that may not be the case. So you may have different assessments for each of your advanced programs, and that's okay. So I know I've talked to several EPPs that were trying to figure out how to do common assessments, and depending on the types of programs that you're putting forth, that might not be feasible to do. And again, that's okay. If you can find commonality and you have a common assessment, that's fine, but that's not a requirement. So if you have different assessments for your different programs, that's okay. And then how many? That's the other question. How many assessments do I need? If I have several programs, I might have lots of different assessments, right? So each program might have 2 or 3 assessments. And the guideline that we're providing is that, you know, the state may have some guidance if they're requiring certain things. In some states, they require certain programs to have certain portfolios or certain activities that are done. Or some states don't have anything like that. It's up to you in your curriculum to decide, you know, how you're going to assess. So it's really about feasibility. So what are you able to do and not be overwhelmed with data? Ensure you're collecting usable data and not just data because you can. So being really targeted on what you want to collect and what you're measuring. But again, that 2 to 4 kind of guidance for programs is about right for some of those key assessments. So again, it looks at how many standards you're having to address, what you're looking for, what type of data you're getting, and not to be overwhelmed. So again, it's a feasibility issue for you to make that decision, but you have the latitude to do that. And then remember in standard A 1.1 that you need to address all 6 of the competencies, the proficiencies that are listed, but you only need to provide the assessment of 3 of them in your curriculum map. So again, that, and we'll talk about it in a minute, the phase-in components, that is under phase-in. So when you do a curriculum map for each of your advanced programs, you'll need to address those 6 proficiencies at some point and plan on assessing 3 of them as you move forward. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes is a point of confusion. You're not having to assess all 6, you're just having to assess 3. And then align your assessments to existing milestones or activities. So again, at the advanced level, there might be natural places where those assessments may fit. And so, you know, think about aligning them to things that are already happening for those advanced candidates. So you're not having to have, you know, something collected every semester or multiple times in a semester, but that you're thoughtful about how that alignment works. So I mentioned something about the phase-ins, and so I do want to talk a little bit about that. So phase-in plans are your friend in advanced, and the reason that they are important is because these are all the components that can be under the phase-in, that can have a phase-in plan. And if you look, that's a lot of the components, right? And there are 3 components, only 3 components that can't be phased in. And those are A 1.2, A 5.1, and A 5.5. And if you look at those 3, A 1.2 is the SPA, state approval, content standards. So, you know, your programs are approved, you're using some content standards either through a SPA, through your state approval process, and you're collecting data at the content level. And so that's not able to be phased in, but if you have a cycle of data or year of data, for those are things that you can't have plans for. And then 5.1 and 5.5, if you notice, they're real kind of process evidence types of components. So you have a quality assurance system, right? If you went through on the initial side of the house, and you may be able to modify that or hook into that for your advanced programs, right? But the overall quality assurance system may be very similar. Or you might have a parallel system if it's a little different for the advanced side of the house. But that's really a process element for 5.1, not so much the data element, but a process element. And then 5.5, stakeholder involvement in the quality assurance system, again, is the process. How are you including your advanced stakeholders in that process? And so if you have that on the initial side, you may be able to add advanced stakeholders to those existing meetings. But again, you're just showing how you're documenting that process with the advanced side. So, so I just wanted to be clear that for the majority of these components under advanced, you want to have a phase-in plan. And so I know one of the questions that I'll get is, well, do we have to have a phase-in plan? What if we're farther down the road and we already have data and we don't want to do a plan? That's perfectly fine. You don't have to use the phase-in plan if you don't want to. But it is a point of protection, right, for you. If you don't have data, you can always say, I have the opportunity to do a phase-in plan, and I'm going to provide that as in lieu of evidence. So just be aware of that if you don't have a full cycle of data, or you're not kind of where you need to be on some of those elements, that by all means use the phase-in plan to your advantage. So for most EPPs, they're going to have phase-ins for all those where phase-ins are acceptable. And for some of you, you're farther down the road on some than others. One question we get a lot is, what if I have several programs and maybe two of my programs are farther along, and two of my programs really are kind of starting at the beginning, and I'm going to have phase-in plans for a lot of elements, but I have a program that's, way down the road, we already have all these things in place, and I don't really have a plan. They already have data. It's fine to provide plans for some of those programs and data for some, if you would like to do that. Or you could encompass all of the programs in a plan, and then talk about, that this program has more progress steps than, these other two. Then that's fine as well. So they don't all have to be at the same place in the process. So I think the original intent or comment when this was first rolled out, I'm reading some of the questions in the question box, was that you had to have one year of data or one cycle of data for this process. And that's great if you have data, but I think one of the issues is we want to make sure that we're being fair to both the folks that are going through under the interim advanced and those in the same semester that are going through both initial and advanced together, right? And so for initial and advanced together in 2021, for a traditional 7-year visit, they're not required to have data. They're required to, to have plans and progress steps if available, or data if available. And so we want to make sure that we're not holding this group to a separate and higher standard than we do the initial, the 7-year folks. So that's why the data requirement is either a sufficient phase-in plan with no data, or if you have data, to have a cycle of data if you prefer to do that. But again, we're not requiring multiple years of data because we're not doing that on the traditional 7-year side. So I hope that's clear in terms of the cycles of data, just because we wanted to make sure that we were in parity with the traditional reviews as well. So if you have a sufficient phase-in plan, or if you have cycle of data, or any combination thereof, that's fine. So one of the questions is, well, if we have maybe some pilot data or preliminary data, but we do have a cycle, do we need to have a plan around it? I would just put a plan around it anyway, just to make sure that you know what the next steps are. So if you have a plan and it meets CAEP sufficiency, then the data becomes gravy or supportive of that plan. Whereas if you're just providing the evidence or the data, the cycle of data, if there's any question or issue with that data, then not having that plan may be not as beneficial, I guess. So it's totally up to you how you do that. But if you're trying to go all data, and you're not doing plans, then you might get some questions from your team about the sufficiency of that data, or if there's any questions about how that data was collected. Or so having a plan is just a support for that. Okay, so one of the questions that now you're thinking is, well, what do I need to include in my plan for it to be sufficient? And so you need to have 3 things. So CAEP sufficiency for a plan includes 3 things. 1 is the relationship to CAEP standards or components. 2 is timeline and resources. And 3 is your data quality. So by just saying, we have a plan, or I plan to do some stuff in the future, is not a sufficient CAEP plan, right? So it needs to have these kind of 3 big components connected to it. And so going through each of these, what do you need to include? So your relationship to the CAEP standard, it should be really clear which standard, which component you're addressing, right, with this plan. So what is it that this plan is addressing, and how is it tagged? So I would suggest when you tag plans, you tag them to the component. So you could say, this is my plan, you know, phase-in plan for A 4.1. That way it's very clear to the reviewer and the team, this is your phase-in plan for this component. Phase-in plan for A 4.2. So it may be that you only have a few pieces of evidence for a standard because it's all in phase-in plan, right? And if you create these phase-in plans for each of the components, then you may only have a few evidences connected to that because it's all part of the phase-in. And then describe a description of the content and objective of the data or evidence you're collecting, again, connected to the standard. So what are you collecting and how is that connected to the component? So a critical piece to your plan is a timeline and the resources you need to make this happen. So, you know, detailing your strategies, your steps, a schedule for collection through the full implementation. So that's another question. What's our timeline have to go out to? Does it have to go out 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 6 months? The timeline goes out as far as you need it to go to get to full implementation. So for some things that may be, you know, 6 months, and for other things that may be 2 years, depending on, you know, what you're trying to do. So just to make sure that you have thought out how long that will take and that you have a plan for what you're doing. And usually in the academic world, we think of semesters or academic years. So what are you planning to do each semester to move forward on your plan? And what are you doing at the end of each academic year? What should you have accomplished in that plan? So to have some, you know, timetable for that is very helpful. The specifications of additional data or evidence that will become available in the calendar years following your accreditation or until completion. So again, talking about when will we have full implementation and collecting data for our, you know, true cycles. How long will that take? And then, you know, be really detailed. Talk about the description of the personnel, the technology, other resources available. Do I need to get, you know, IRB approval? That's always an interesting question, if appropriate, and EPP access to data compilation and analysis capability. So I'm collecting the data one semester. What do I need when I'm actually analyzing the data? Am I going to need, you know, a student worker, or am I going to need, you know, somebody to help with the analysis? What is it that I'm going to need to do that next level? So the Institutional Review Board, that's again an EPP decision. Some EPPs are using the information they're collecting or their process or the things that they're doing for publication purposes or for other reporting that goes outside of accreditation or program improvement. And so for a lot of institutions, they require that if that was your plan for what you're doing with some of your data. If you're doing all of this under the accreditation / program improvement category, most of these are exempt in universities. So that's something that you'll have to talk with your university about if that's something that is appropriate moving forward. So again, if you're planning on doing any kind of publication or presentation or providing data to candidates or something for analysis, then that's something that you'll have to decide at the EPP level for IRB approval. The third thing is the data quality. So again, if you have copies of instruments, a pilot of an instrument, you're creating new rubrics, you know, where are you in that process? And so, you know, whatever information you may have, provide a copy of that. Description of the procedure to ensure that your surveys, you know, are reaching the level 3 on the CAEP assessment rubric. So again, wherever you are in that process, you may be just collecting information to create your survey. What have you done so far? Where are you in that process? And if you have pilot or drafts of instruments, then by all means include them. What steps are you taking to get a, you know, good response, a representative sample, you know, those kinds of activities, again, talking through what that looks like, what you're doing. What steps are you doing for content validity and the interpretation of data? So again, are you planning on having a assessment day where you're doing reliability and validity analysis at some point in the future, and where that is in your timeline? and then steps to analyze and interpret findings and make use of them for continuous improvement. So again, just really detailed and descriptive about, how you're ensuring that you have a high data quality for those instruments that you're collecting. So I thought it would be helpful. We talked about these things, but I thought it would be helpful if I gave you an example of a template. So one of the best things to do for plans is to come up with a template that you want to use, because if all of your plans are in the same template, it makes it very easy for you to go through and make sure that you're hitting all the required elements, but also for the reviewers to know these are the required elements of a plan, and these are the things I'm seeing in the plans that you're providing. And if they're all in the same template or format, it makes it much easier to kind of review plans. So this is an example of one from an institution that shared with us, and I thought was actually a pretty good template. And this is one template. I've had to kind of cut it up and put it on multiple slides, but it is one sort of large template when you look at it. But all the pieces are there. So if you look at this, the things that are kind of blocked in red are the things that are required in a CAEP sufficient plan. So the relationship to the standard or component. This particular plan is for A 4.1. And again, talking about which component it's for, how does it relate to the standard. And then this EPP added descriptors or other components in their template that they needed to address that were helpful for them in following through completing their plan. So you can change how this looks. You can decide however you want the side categories to be. And that's fine. It can be much shorter than this. It can be longer. It can be however you want. This is just an example. So this is not, what we're expecting to see. This is just an example that meets all the criteria. So the next one, so that's relationship to standard. So here's an example of a timeline. So these are strategies for collecting this data and how they're going to accomplish it. And if you look at this, it's very detailed. And it also provides it she's doing it by year. So this is 2019 through 2020. That's their pilot year. And then what is it that they have to do at each of these steps in order to complete the phases of their plan, right? And they're looking at, this is going to be collected, every 3 years. This is what we're doing. And these are the steps. And then the next part of the grid is the timetable. So again, so in this year, it has dates, and it's not the date. Some of them are the date, like October 15th, we hope to do X, Y, and Z. But really a detailed timeline. So not just, hey, we're going to accomplish some stuff this semester, but really specifically what is it that you're looking for each semester as you move forward. So again, is it pilot? Is it full data? What's our goal? And then at the end of every semester, you can kind of check off where you are and what you've been able to do and what needs to be done the following semester or year. And then I did mention in the next one that this is things to complete in template, right? So these were things that were in her original template, but are things that need to be done, right? So a copy of the employer feedback protocol. Well, she wasn't done with the protocol yet, but she put it in here as a placeholder, right? To remind herself, when this is done, I need to put this in here, where am I? And then the data quality steps, she again has these as TBD because this is a template that she's currently working on, right? So this is an active template, and then as she's able to answer these questions and kind of think it through, she's able to, she's able to fill this in. So I just wanted to kind of give you that idea to think about a format or a template to use, because again, it's really helpful to have it not only for your own organization, but for the review team as well. And because there are so many components in phase-in, I think it's just really helpful to organize your process this way so that you're able to pull out a plan for a specific component and know, kind of what you're doing within each of these requirements. So how much detail you put in here and at what level, are you putting things, that's totally up to you. I've seen one that has under resources, it goes all the way down to, we need to get the parking stickers for the parking permits for the stakeholders coming to campus. We need to, find a donor for some, cookies and coffee to talk to our stakeholders. I mean, it was detailed down to that level because those are action items that this person, needed to do in order to make this stakeholder meeting happen, or this, assessment day happen. So it can be that level of detail, but it needs to be enough so that the plan has enough meat in it that a reviewer can say, yes, this looks like it's actually happening. So not just kind of like sentences like, we're going to do that this semester, or we're going to, you know, we plan to do this, this, and this, but not really have concrete steps that they need to follow. So I hope that helps in terms of at least thinking through a template and thinking what needs to be, you know, kind of clear in that. So I hope that's something that you can take and you can think about, you know, moving forward with and creating your own template. I'm the case manager for all the interim advanced reports, and I'm happy at some point if you say, you know, I've created a template, I think it has everything in it. I'm happy to look at an empty template and say, yeah, it looks like, you know, these are all the components you need to have, or this looks clear. I'm not, you know, going to look at your template and say, or look at your data and say, oh yeah, this is all good, except you need to change this, this, and this. But I will at least give you feedback on a template if that's kind of the route that you're going. Okay, so evidence to support your narrative. So when you think about your evidences, right? So your evidence could be a plan. So if you're labeling your phase-in plans by component and standard, that's really helpful to make sure that it's clear what's data and what's a plan, a phase-in plan. And if you are an EPP that's doing all phase-in plans, you know, for those components that it's acceptable for, it just makes it much easier to review. So just labeling them according to the component and standard is really good. And then you may just have a few evidences per standard because you have phase-in plans for all the components of that. So for example, standard 4 only has 2 components. You might have 2 phase-in plans and maybe some other document. You may have 3 to 5 pieces of evidence for that, that standard because it's all under phase-in. So just be aware of that. Don't be worried that, you know, it doesn't look like I have a lot here, but everything's meeting the criteria for a phase-in plan. And my narrative is a few paragraphs, or, you know, it's short, but I'm covering everything and everything is in my phase-in plan. So don't necessarily feel like, you know, you're short shrifting your standard because you don't have that many pieces of evidence or your narrative is shorter than it has been in your initial side. So just be aware of that. And then this is really important. Teams do not have access to your previous report, so make sure you upload any previous evidence you wish them to review. So your review team has no connection to any of your previous reviews. So nobody on your interim advanced review team will have been on your initial review, right? So there's no carryover between the teams. So these people are totally fresh to this review. They're not looking at anything previous. So if in your like text for standard 5, you say, well, we have a quality assurance system, see, you know, initial report. They're not going to have a way to go do that because they don't have access to the previous reports. So you can use components from your standard 5 that you did for your initial review. If those are parallel to the things that you're doing on the advanced side, you of course can have some overlap and take that and edit it to fit advanced, or if it is the same process, you can clarify that in the text, but make sure that that narrative is uploaded in AIMS in this report, and any evidence to support that is also in evidence in this report. So there's no reference to your previous reports because teams don't have access to that. So again, use the things that fit, and you can modify them, but make sure that everything that the review team needs is in AIMS in this template for your interim advanced review. So I'm hoping that makes sense. And the other piece of information about the template, the shell in AIMS, when you log in, you'll notice there are familiar pieces prior to the standards. There's your EPP context and your clinical faculty qualifications, and kind of all of those sort of general tables that were prior to the standards in your initial. And you may cut and paste from your previous report, your EPP context, your accreditation letters. We took out the parity table, so that's not included in the interim advanced. So we tried to remove things that were that we could in the template, and we're down to what is required. So a team needs to know your EPP context in order to write the report, so that needs to be in there. They would need a list of your advanced faculty, your advanced clinical faculty, if those, because that may be a different list than your initial side. So those kinds of things need to be updated and uploaded. But the things like EPP context, those are things that your context doesn't change, so you can do that. So just be aware, and you can start that. If your shell's open now, you can go in and cut and paste those things in right now and get those things done, and then just be worrying about your standards as you move forward. So so I just wanted to make that point, because I think some folks have thought that it was going to be the same team or a combination thereof from your previous visit to this one, and there's no connection there. So we've had a conversation about the schedule in terms of like the number of days. So things like some EPPs really want there to be a set number of days between when the self-study comes in and when the formative feedback report goes out. So like the teams have 30 days to do this, or they have 15 days to do this, or they have 10 days to do this. And we've kind of gone around about trying to figure out a way that that's consistent. And it's been really hard to figure that out in one semester, to make sure that all the visits aren't occurring, at the same time of the semester, if those days are in place, since the reports are coming in the same day. So we have not done that. We have not put that in place. So, I know that that's something that people want, but we also have to be flexible with EPPs that want to have their reviews later in the spring and into the summer, or they need to have their reviews earlier. And so if we put deadlines in there and things get done earlier, then we just really struggle with that. So we purposely have not done that. That conversation can still happen, but I just don't think, I think we're trying to be as flexible as possible with folks. The intent with teams is that they are set early and that they will get reports done quickly, because they are mostly plans and they are small teams and they're meeting virtually. So my goal with training and talking with all the folks that are going to do interim advanced reviews is that there is that kind of 30-day limit. So when the reports come in, if you can get and turn your report around within that 30 days, that's great. But I do want it to still be able to have a case-by-case basis for those that need different requirements, either earlier or later. Okay. So I don't know if any of you are planning to go to CAEPCON, but I put the link in here. We are doing we do advanced sessions for advanced programs. We do a phase-in session. There's lots of how to write a self-study kind of sessions, and individual time with EPPs. So if that's something that is available to you and you are free to go to, that's great. We will all be there in New Orleans the 9th through the 12th. And again, if you're very new to the whole CAEP process, if you've been hired in the interim between your last visit and this interim visit and you need more information, CAEPCON is one of those places that you can get that. But if you have any specific questions for me, like I said, I'm the case manager, and we're going to try and do touch base webinars or conference calls maybe that are more interactive over the course of the next 6 to 8 months, so that there's more opportunity for you to ask and have answered questions about this process. I do want to say one thing about the process. So as we're going through the phase-in, I really do think that it's going to be really hard, and you're going to have to try really, really hard to get stipulations in this process, because a sufficient CAEP plan covers majority of the components. And so really working on creating sufficient plans, I think eliminates a lot of the opportunity for stipulations about, not having any data or not having any information. So I think that that is one sort of stress point for a lot of people. They feel like, they're just stressed about the whole process. But when I think about it, I think of the phase-in plans as being very helpful in supporting a positive outcome for EPPs. So I want you to kind of think about that in terms of putting a lot of effort into those plans and making sure that they're sufficient, and then being able to move forward from that. So that's I'm anticipating that these are going to run smoothly, and that that the outcomes will be positive. So. So one question in the question boxes that I'll go ahead and answer is the question about virtual visits, kind of who needs to be in those meetings. And that's going to be a decision between the chair and the EPP. So depending on where the questions are in your report, in your self-study and in your formative report, that will kind of dictate who is available in those meetings, right? So it may be that the core team, whoever your core team is, the folks that are the folk singular or folks plural that are writing the reports, CAEP coordinator, assessment person, dean, those types of people would obviously be on the meeting. And then you may have representation from other groups. So this is not going to be, a 9 to 8 o'clock at night virtual visit where you're bringing in groups of faculty and groups of candidates and groups of stakeholders and all these different groups that you have on a regular site visit, because most of it is in phase-in, right? So the people that you want to have in the room are the people that can articulate and talk about those phase-in plans and moving forward. So it may be a small group. So virtual visits are set for 1 day. And again, depending on the number of questions, they could range, I would say, from 2 hours to 5 hours, depending on the number of questions for each of the standards. So as you're creating that logistics of the day with your team lead, that will determine who and how many folks need to be available. So it's basically who can answer the tasks and questions and who can speak to those plans as you move forward. So it's not in the traditional sense that there's going to be these just multiple numbers of interviews and groups like a traditional visit. So the templates for the plans that I provided, the example, those are examples that you would put in evidence. So you would fill those out and create those templates for your phase-in plans. That's not the same as the template for the shell for the self-study. That's different than the shell. So the shell looks the same. You're going to write a narrative and you're going to upload evidences to that narrative in AIMS. But the template that I provided is not the template for your self-study. It's a template for the evidence for a phase-in plan, or what you would need to include in your phase-in plan. And then there was a question about 3 cycles of data. So at no point are you required to have 3 cycles of data for this review. 1 cycle at most 2. If you have something going on that's spanning that. But a phase-in plan may have no data at all. It may just have the sufficient plan of moving forward, and you might have pilot data or something else. But no, 3 cycles of data is not required for the interim advanced reviews. So there are lots of questions in the question box, and Vince has answered some live, so hopefully you'll see the answers to those. And then any of the other ones that I see some that look like they're specific to institutions, I'm happy to answer as we move forward. And if you are, the shells are open through fall of 21. So if you are, like I said, if you're cycle D or tier D, your shell's not open yet. But if you're A, B, or C, your shell should be open. And if it's not, just send me an email so I can find out why it's not, so I can get it open for you. So yes, if you go into Ames and your shell's not open and you're prior to fall 21, please send me an email and then I can troubleshoot that for you. Okay, so again, this PowerPoint and webinar will be it was recorded and will be posted for you to go through. So I know I talk fast, so you can slow me down to a different pace and listen to it again, or listen to it before you go to bed at night to help you go to sleep. So anything like that, and again, you can email me with any questions as we move forward. So again, I appreciate your time, and I hope this clarifies some questions, and I know it will raise others as you move forward. But again, we're starting the conversation, so hopefully you'll get started on this process early, and we will be able to answer all your questions so that you feel less stressed about moving forward. Thank you so much.